Hello, friends. This is Keith Joseph from the Institute for Hermetic Studies. Today, I am here with John Prestor, my colleague at the Institute, and we're going to be talking about lucid dreaming. Uh, Jacob and I had talked about it a little bit last week, so we'll be this is a totally different way of approaching the subject matter, but we'll still be on the subject of lucid dreams. So, James has some experience with successfully lucid dreaming, but kind of his ability to do it came about in an interesting way. So, James, can you describe, I guess, what we mean by lucid dreaming, and then the kind of practices that you engaged in to bring about lucid dreams?
Yeah, so I consider the lucid dreaming practice really a continuity of consciousness practice. Mark has talked about Mark Stavish, the director of studies at the Institute of Hermetic Studies, whom I'm a personal student of his, and that's how I got involved with lucid dreaming. That the purpose of lucid dreaming ultimately is to be able um, to maintain the integrity of the soul after death, right? So you maintain a continuity of consciousness in the same way that you bridge your waking consciousness to your sleeping consciousness. That when you no longer have a body and you have, oh, sorry about that. I don't know why that's going on here.
Those are excellent.
When, oh, that's excellent. When you no longer have the continuity of a body, and you have all the pressures of death pulling at the soul, that you're able to maintain some sort of integrity, right? So this is a practice for death in some sense, and even if that's not the case, I think that we ignore our dream life entirely. We don't really care about it. We don't really consider it real, even though it takes up a huge portion of our life and our consciousness. And I think our dreams very much are a strong signal, just like your emotions, right? If somebody is sad or upset or anxious, very often this is a signal that we've evolved that we should pay attention to, that something is going on. And our dreams give us enormous amounts of signals, psychological, spiritual signals that we can listen to and that we can interact with, we can learn from. And ultimately, through lucid dreaming, we can self-program, a great deal, if we take responsibility for our dreams and our own consciousness. And that's what I think lucid dreaming is.
So, James, that's really interesting. Let me backtrack a little bit. So normally people have, I think, a more narrow understanding of lucid dreams. I remember even when I was younger, um, talking to friends, and they were figuring out ways to do it, but it
Yeah,
was almost like a playground or something, right? This was just another opportunity to um really pursue sexual fantasies, I think, if we're being straightforward about it. So
right. Sure.
so um but what you're saying is it there is this element of taking control over your dream, which is kind of what everyone
Hmm.
thinks of when they think of lucid dreaming. But you're implying that there's something more profound going on here, that this, you said, a practice for two things that you said, a practice for death and the continuity of consciousness. Maybe we could dig in a little bit into those ideas. So maybe first, what do we
So the
mean by continuity of consciousness? And then what do you mean by a practice for death exactly?
So continuity of consciousness means that there is continuity between your waking self and your dreaming self. And this is never a perfect sort of thing, but the idea of being able to lucid dream more at will, is to sort of wake up your consciousness within the dream. So almost everyone's had a lucid dream, and usually what that means is, you're dozing in the morning, and you kind of wake up, and you're kind of able to go back to sleep, right, and kind of get in that dream. But now you're aware that you're dreaming, so you can control it, and that's great, and that is lucid dreaming. Um, what I'm talking about is doing it a little more uh, uh, sort of at will, but also doing it with specific intentionalities, right? So for somebody who's trying to like use them for their entertainment, that's their intention, that's their use, you know, and that's your programming. And I say programming because this is like a very powerful virtual experience that you're having, just like people have powerful nightmares and things like that. But not only that, but all of these elements are you, or their various spiritual inputs that we're having, or psychological inputs that we're having, right? So we get to do something with that information. So I'll give you a really simple one, right? That pretty much everybody could do. So I tell my kids when they were growing up, if you have a nightmare in the morning, right? You don't have to just get up and go to school or something. You know, you have a few minutes, you have a little bit of time. If you have a nightmare that you wake up from that's kind of disturbing and they'll kind of haunt you during the day, just go back to sleep and fix it. You know, if you can get back in that dream and turn that around. And why is that useful? Because you're telling your consciousness that when you run into something hard, you can have influence over, you can have agency, you can fix this, right? So you build this habit in your head. Hey, if I have a nightmare and I realize I'm having a nightmare, I can turn this around, right? You're building a habit, a mental habit for yourself. And I think that's really, it's really, really powerful.
So
Do you see what I mean?
yeah, no, I do. So that idea that you can use dreams to kind of um work out some problems, that I think is really an interesting point. And then just on a practical note, you mentioned this twice, so maybe we could just um drill into it a little bit. This is a way, you have a way of now lucid dreaming, which would
Yeah,
be that morning. So if I think about my own experience, that's actually the only times that I really am able to lucid dream. And it's like the worst thing because that's always the alarm is about to go off. I have to go to work, whatever. But
right.
that early morning where you're in a semi state of consciousness and you're kind of dozing back and forth, that's actually an opportunity to do the practice, if I understand what you're saying correctly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that that's what's great about that opportunity as opposed to some of these more at will sorts of things. The at will lucid dreaming, it can take a lot of work. It took me a lot of work. Some people maybe it's easy to do, but it took me a lot of work to be able to do that. But if you can get there easily, you know, that's that's great as well. That's you should still exploit those opportunities, I think, to manage yourself and your consciousness. And just like the nightmare example, you know, build habits and experiences that are productive with whatever you're working with. And I think for a lot of people, just an easy way to do that is, you know, how do you fix your nightmares? How do you deal with your nightmares? How do you deal with things that are unpleasant? How do you make things work for you? This is just like we're managing our life in a day. How do we think about our experiences in a way that's productive, that moves us forward, right? Well, here's a playground, here's a laboratory to do just that.
So the idea then, the continuity of consciousness, is to kind of understand that your waking conscious and your sleeping conscious are, they're
The
in a
same
way
thing,
the same thing, right? And so
right?
maybe does this make sense that you would also kind of remind yourself during the day that there's a, is there a dream aspect to daily life, or
Absolutely. So for me, the core of the lucid dreaming practice is actually changing your consciousness a little bit during the day by continually reminding yourself. This seems counterintuitive, but you'll let me finish. So you remind yourself during the day that this is a dream and that I can control this dream and that the purpose of this dream is my ultimate flourishing and unfoldment. Now, it can be a different sort of phrase, but something to that end, right? So this has a purpose. You notice I say, one, I'm dreaming, I control it, and it's for purpose X. Like these are the three ingredients you've got to have running. And if you remind yourself all the time, and I have a lot of stupid specific hyper specific advice on how to do this, because it's a little trickier than just, oh, remind yourself all the time, because the mind is very context dependent. Like, you might be really good at reminding yourself when you're at home and nothing's going on, but suddenly you get at work and you don't think about it at all. Well, this is just like the dream world, right? So you're in a completely different context. It doesn't even occur to you that you're dreaming. But if you remind yourself when you're awake in a variety of contexts, right, then when you're sleeping, you go, oh, yeah, I'm dreaming. And this is a dream. And I can control this dream. Oh, and it's for this purpose. Cool. Now I can do things. Now you're awake in a dream. Now you can make things happen. And in my experience, if though you're having a really emotional or some type of dream that's really impactful, it becomes harder to wake up within the dream. So you're doing better when you can have a nightmare and recognize the nightmare very quickly and pull yourself out of it. That's actually really challenging. Also, it's sometimes really challenging if you're not sleeping for a very long period of time, because you're in a very deep sleep. You're not getting much of a REM cycle in there. If you can do it during that time, that's impressive.
During the deeper sleep is I guess this is just a technical question I have. You're saying then that the goal or a higher level of mastery is actually being able to be aware while you're sleeping, right? Because so my understanding of how this works is that we're only dreaming for a portion of our sleep
Right,
cycle. Now
right.
you're suggesting that we could maintain awareness throughout sleep, so that sleep is a continuous meditation. Is that, am I understanding
I'm
it right?
sure that maybe there are some great sages that could do that. I can't
I
I
all
can't
right,
do
I
that. No,
understand.
no, no, no.
Man,
What
I
I'm saying is,
misunderstood
like,
what you said.
for
Right.
example, very often when people wake up, when a dream wakes them up, it's like later on in their sleep cycle, you know, and they've had some time, because usually I don't know if you like, somebody wears like a sleep monitoring like ring or watch or something like that. You'll see these patterns of deep sleep where it's like you start off, you have your deep sleep, right, and then you're able to start having some REM cycles, and the REM cycles get more and more often the longer you sleep, right? So you don't really get nice restorative sleep with 3 or 4 hours. And you're not going to have much, you might have some dream time, but you don't really have a lot of, chances to lucid dream, because you're not dreaming so much. That's just,
Right. Right.
and it's harder because your body is really put you in a really deep state of sleep. It's really holding on to you tighter. It's harder to lucid dream if you're not sleeping. I mean, it's just like it's harder to remember your dreams, because you have to push so much cortisol and so much work into getting up. That you're not remembering your dream. You're not spending any time there.
So before we move on from here, you kind of quickly mentioned that this practice of paying attention during the day,
Mhm.
specifically, are there specific things that people can do? What
Yeah,
you
I
had
think.
like reminders, but you had
Yeah.
phrases that you like to use,
So
or
so like a lot of people, I'm very, very busy. So practices that you have to continually return to, like a mantra or idea throughout the day, these are hard for me. Because, man, if you're so busy, you're at work, you don't get to eat lunch, you're trying to get times to go to the bathroom, like it's really
sure.
hard
Hmm.
to maintain something, right? And also just to be reminded to do this. So usually that means for me having certain triggers, right? So every time you leave and enter a building, okay, every time you step outside, every single time someone finishes talking to you, every single time, whatever it is, if you have just a single trigger or two, and you just try to remember every time these things happen, so then you're going to be in the dream state. And what's going to happen? Someone's going to talk to you, you're going to step into a new environment, whatever these things are, and it's going to go, oh, I'm dreaming. I can control my dream, and it's for this purpose, right? Because
So
you've had that phrase, whatever that phrase is, hammered into your head in all these different contexts. And you're going to be able to wake yourself up, and that is probably the simplest thing to do. There's some other esoteric practices and things that can assist you in this. And there are also ways you can suggest certain dreams or certain dream patterns, but that's the core. That's the big one. That's the one you really want to hammer in.
sure. So I love that. That's great. So like walking through a door, that's in my mind that's a great, because that's already
Yeah,
like there's already a reorientation that takes place anyway. So you can just layer on a reminder
yeah,
there. Yeah, excellent.
yeah. And it becomes that short, and that's quick. You're just reminding yourself, and over time you can stack more context.
Right.
But it just, it takes time. It's a
Hmm.
habit like anything else. So I just say, keep it really simple. Keep it
Yeah.
so simple. You're just like, how many doors am I going to walk through? That's a practice. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Just try to get that for a while, then start adding other contexts and to help remind you to do that throughout the day.
Yeah. That's awesome. So then you mentioned we touched on this continuity of consciousness in some of the practice, but you had mentioned that this is really about, so there's kind of maybe two ways of thinking of the continuity of consciousness. There's the continuity between your dream and wake, and now you're also suggesting that there's a continuity of consciousness with with the death of the body, with
Mm-hmm.
the end of the body, that this practice somehow prepares us for the maintaining of our consciousness after death.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's the idea. That's the traditional teaching. And, even for those skeptical of, you know, their post-mortem existence, um, there's real power in having that level of self-control. It definitely shows up in other esoteric work that I do. So, for example, one of the things that happened to me really by accident, I've never been able to reproduce this, is I started having a number of really prophetic dreams. One of them in particular was not even symbolic. It was just literally something that was happened, and I have all these um, dream records, and it was very detailed. And even the way I found out about the events, like everything, was really chill. Now, someone could say, "Hey, okay, let's just say it is. It's somehow I was able to access my consciousness to think through a future scenario in such great detail and to pick up all these details that I was able to anticipate this event in the future. If that's true, that's extraordinary. Why wouldn't you want that kind of perception? Again, if you think of dreams as a signal, right? You're trying to be aware of those things in the signal. And the discipline that it takes to maintain that consciousness, again, the traditional idea is that confronted with the fracturing that occurs after death, that you would be able to maintain awareness and to be able to make decisions and choices and keep yourself together, as opposed to just being overwhelmed by all these forces. Just in the same way that you're overwhelmed and distracted within a dream, it's a completely different state of consciousness. We do strange, unexpected things.
Right, right. And even in daily life, if we're not paying attention, right, we're kind of dominated by our lower impulses
Oh
and
yeah.
this sort of thing. So
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, so really interesting. Okay, so James, we kind of have a little bit of the theory now. What if say I want to start um trying to dream? I have a couple of those practices. Is there anything else I have to do when I go to bed?
But
Oh, you've done
the
some of
one
these
the one
practices.
yeah, there's a couple of things I'd like to mention. The first is given in Mark's book, Between the Gates. Uh, and that is, he lists in there the concentration on the psychic center in the throat. He relates it to, I mean, there's different ways of doing it, but he relates it to the color red and to the quality of our planet of Mercury. And really, if you think about this, is a gateway point. You can almost think of it symbolically too. It's like between the head and between the heart, right? This is that liminal space, right? That's the whole idea of Mercury. Like alchemical Mercury is that middle substance between sulfur and salt, right? You know, the ancient herms were kind of boundary markers between here and there. And Mercury is always this kind of liminal twilight figure, right? And this practice is just that, right? Here we are awake and we're going to go to sleep. And here is this liminal twilight center. If we can really concentrate on that as we're going to sleep and enliven that, and thinking of it in those mercurial terms, I think there's some type of not only spiritual or magical effect, but I think there's a physiological effect, maybe having to do, I don't know, with the that happens from it there. But there's something palpable that happens when you go to sleep from that practice. So I really think that that's wonderful and essential. And the other is quite simple, and that is telling yourself that you're going to dream and that you're going to wake up in your dream and it's for this purpose, right? The same thing you remind yourself all the time. You're thinking that same thing and announcing it. There's a great little anecdote I wanted to share with you. I was talking to Mark about lucid dreaming, and he was saying, one of the things you should look for in your dreams, to know that you have an evolved practice, is that you should be able to read in your dreams and receive written information, because that's very, very hard to do in dreams. And I was like, I've never read I can't imagine reading something in my dreams. And he's like, okay, so what you do is you just imagine like a whiteboard, okay? And then you're taking out the marker. And you know the way those markers smell, those whiteboard markers, okay? And the squeak that it makes on the whiteboard, okay? And you're gonna write on this whiteboard, and just imagine it now. I am going to read, hear it squeaks and smell it in my dreams, I heard that and it was very vivid to me. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go try that. But I didn't. It was late at night. I was talking to him on the phone and I said, okay, I'll get around to doing that. Make a note of it. Went to sleep. I'm in a library. I kid you not. So I didn't even take the extra time, but just from hearing him over the phone and getting that suggestion, I had a dream about reading, and suddenly I was reading all these different things, and I wrote down in the dream all these different things that I was reading in the dream, and I'd never done that before. So the power of that suggestion, especially if it's done like Mark suggests, if you can make it really evocative, you can see it, you can hear it, you can smell it, you have this evocative invocation to have something happen in your dreams, then that will come out. And so I think those two things, the throat-centered practice at night and suggesting to yourself, just like you go throughout the day, those are like the two things that I think are the most valuable.
That's awesome. James, I think that this is amazing. Really helpful information. Is there anything else that's important for people to know before we wrap it up? If they're going to start a practice, practical advice or theoretical things?
The one thing, there's just a couple of things. One is I'll just give an anecdote for myself, and the other is one of the biggest reasons I would encourage people to make the investment into lucid dreaming, and it is an investment. It takes time. Mark is always joking. He's always saying, you're sleeping 7 hours a night. You got 7 hours to practice during, anyway. But I'm always just like, it takes so much time in reality and during the day. But it's a worthwhile investment because it gives you this whole other reflective space. So people will, draw tarot cards to learn about what they're doing and ask spiritual questions, and they'll do charts. But you're dreaming all the time.
In their dreams,
you're going to have you're going to have reflections on your practice. You're going to have reflections on these things you're dealing with. You're going to have reflections on yourself. You're going to have all this information being brought to you and you can pay attention to it, and you can interact with it, and you can, and that to me is extraordinarily valuable. So, really worth the investment. The other thing I was going to say is just the anecdote is to be persistent in this. I feel like I would joke that I was one of the worst students of this ever, because I tried for like a little over 5 months, and was just getting nowhere, just nowhere. I kept thinking that, I needed to remind myself in different ways, or do the body centered practice different. I was doing a few other practices during the day, but I was really, really trying on this. And I finally just kind of gave up, and I moved on to some body of light practices. And suddenly I was doing lucid dreaming all the time. I was having all kinds of events of really, really deep lucidity. And that's when I had some of those prophetic dreams, which never have really come back, and all this sort of thing. But it wouldn't have happened. I know people sometimes think that it was the practice that I moved to, and it might have been, but it really was just putting in those reps and putting in that work. I was programming myself, and then I didn't need to work on it so hard anymore. I just needed to go to bed and do these things, and there's a fair amount of lucidity, and it's not every night. I don't get it every time. There's still dreams that are very evocative, and they overwhelm me, and I don't wake up in them, but it's still really, really useful. So it's worth the investment for any practicing esotericist.
That's amazing. James, thanks so much, and
Yeah,
really appreciate you spending time with us, and hopefully we can meet again and do another one.
sounds great.
And
Thanks, man.
yeah, and so if you have comments, please leave any comments in below. I'll put a link to the book from Mark on dream practice, and we will see you in the next video.